As one YouTuber puts it, Sekiro is a tale of clashing swords, so we must start with a mention of the Kusabimaru sword. Kuro hands it to Wolf in the prologue at Moonview Tower, and from that moment, the entire game is built around a plain, dependable katana rather than a loot parade of stronger blades. The game lore describes it as a Hirata family heirloom that was lost and found again. It's a core part of the game's combat mechanics, using the sword for attacking, deflecting, and parrying, which in my opinion is easier said than done. A couple of 100,000 broken controllers and keyboards would agree with me. Miyazaki said that Sekiro is built around a fixed protagonist, a shinobi who survives by all means necessary, and resurrection was added to keep the tempo sharp rather than make the game easier. You are meant to fight close, stay aggressive, and treat every enemy that has laid eyes on you, like the Eden Beast from Elden Ring. Even the subtle logic supports the idea. Shadows die twice began as a trailer phrase, then became a warning about death, revival, and the game's core loop. A common interpretation is that these words carry the sense of a sword of binding, or to tie with that which is precious, which fits the bond between Wolf and Kuro, and the way the blade anchors Wolf to his duty. Fans often treat Kusabimaru as a complicated lore object, and not just a sword. It represents loyalty, restraint, and the mercy that the item description asks a shinobi not to forget. Shinobi legacy isn't spelled out in a single cutscene, and that's exactly the point. To understand it, you need to follow Wolf's training, his tools, and his journey. Let's go to the start of the game. You find yourself in the aftermath of a failed mission at the Ashina Reservoir. But did you know the game starts way before these events? For starters, let's discuss the mysterious owl, the man who raised Wolf. And in case you didn't already know, Owl is a master shinobi who adopts war orphans and turns them into operatives bound by absolute loyalty. That ideology becomes the backbone of shinobi legacy. Obedience over emotion, mission over morality. You see it early when Wolf is expected to follow the Iron Code without hesitation, even if it means abandoning Kuro. That internal conflict leads to different narrative choices depending on whether you obey or break that code. Compare that with Elden Ring's endings, and it seems that Miyazaki loves to give the entire narration control to the players. Things get more interesting with the prosthetic arm. After losing his arm to Genichiro, Wolf is rebuilt by the sculptor, and that's where legacy becomes mechanical. And for those of you who don't know what the shinobi prosthetic is, it's an ancient version of advanced warfare crap, where Wolf's arm is a fully modded combat tool, allowing him to equip gadgets like the loaded shuriken or flame vent. Again, it extends the shinobi philosophy: adapt, improvise, survive. There's even an Easter egg layer here. Several prosthetic tools are direct counters to specific bosses, like the firecrackers against beasts, reinforcing the idea that shinobi don't fight fair, they fight smart. On the topic of key actors of the shinobi legacy, you have the sculptor himself, who adds a darker arc to the story. He was once a shinobi too, but failed to control his bloodlust and nearly became Shura, a state in which a warrior loses all sense of purpose and becomes consumed by mindless killing. This ties into one of the endings, but we're just getting started, so let's keep the endings for later. What was pretty clear to the fans was that this mindless killing led to the ultimate collapse of shinobi legacy. When discipline erodes, all that remains is violence. Even subtle world events support this, like the increasing presence of interior ministry forces, showing how shinobi are being phased out in a changing war. Genichiro Ashina is the first official test Sekiro shows you. You meet him at the Ashina Reservoir in the opening, and the outcome is fixed. You lose your arm, no matter how well you play. And trust me, this adds to the already peaking frustration from the gameplay. In multiple interviews, Hidetaka Miyazaki explained that certain encounters are designed to communicate hierarchy rather than skill checks. Genichiro sits at the top of that early hierarchy. He is the adopted grandson of Isshin Ashina, raised during a collapsing war state. This is why his entire identity revolves around preserving Ashina at any cost. The rooftop fight at Ashina Castle is loaded with mechanical and narrative callbacks. His moveset mirrors Wolf's toolkit, deflections, Mikiri counters, and even the same aggressive tempo the game forces you to learn. Dev notes suggest Genichiro was built as a skill gate, a boss that confirms whether the player has internalized posture-based combat. Then Phase 3 hits Way of Tomoe. A quick recap. Tomoe was Genichiro's mentor, tied to lightning techniques originating from the Fountainhead Palace. That's why lightning reversal becomes mandatory here. The game literally weaponizes a lore detail into a gameplay mechanic. There are many smaller details that players miss here. Genichiro's bow is not just for ranged pressure, it's a pacing tool that punishes healing, forcing constant engagement. His armor design subtly degrades across phases, reflecting a loss of control. Even his resurrection mechanic mirrors Waltz, which feeds into a popular fan theory. Genichiro is essentially a failed Sekiro, a shinobi who chose power over balance. That idea peaks during the final encounter where he sacrificed himself to summon Isshin. It's not a boss intro, it's a ritual, and Miyazaki has hinted that Genichiro's arc represents stagnation, clinging to strength instead of adapting. In a game about evolution through combat, that makes him both a rival and a warning. Loving this dark tale? Please subscribe to the channel. This will help us to create more content that you guys enjoy. Now, there's a system in Sekiro Shadows Die Twice that rewires the entire difficulty curve, and most players walk right past it on their first run. And why wouldn't they? The game's already impossibly hard as it is. But for those hardcore From Software addicts, the Bell Demon is located at Senpo Temple, Mount Kongo, and interacting with it gives you the Bell Demon status. It's a global modifier that makes enemies more aggressive, increases chip damage, and slightly improves item drop rates. It's not a menu option or a setting. It's disguised as a cursed object in the world. That's classic From Software design. Difficulty as a narrative choice, not a toggle. Because again, who in their right mind would go through Elden Ring and other Souls games and then increase the difficulty? The interesting part is how it ties into Buddhist folklore. The Bell Demon is heavily inspired by the concept of temple bells warding off evil spirits. Except here, the effect is inverted. Instead of protection, ringing the bell invites hardship. Miyazaki has repeatedly emphasized environmental storytelling over spelling out the details, Elden Ring being the biggest example. There is no tutorial explaining what has happened with this change. You face it in the next combat sequence. Players noticed that even basic enemies start pushing sloppy deflections more aggressively. There is also a subtle connection to another mechanic, Kuro's Charm. If you give Kuro's Charm back at the start of New Game Plus, the game removes the safety net on blocking, forcing you to deflect perfectly or take damage. Stack that with the Bell Demon, and you get what the community calls the true Sekiro experience. It's not officially named, but it's widely treated as the intended high-skill baseline. That idea lines up with what Miyazaki intended for the combat. Miyazaki has mentioned that Sekiro was designed to push players into mastery rather than offer build variety. Fans have built theories around the Bell Demon as well. A popular take is that it represents temptation, the promise of better loot at the cost of control. Another interpretation connected to Senpo Temple's corrupted monks. It's a religious site in the game where monks pursued immortality through unethical experiments. The Bell Demon is a creative way for devs to show how they used storytelling as a mechanic. You ring it, you accept the imbalance. While we're on the topic of combat mechanics, let's compare the combat in Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, with other Souls games. The first thing Sekiro does differently from the rest of From Software's sword-based games is change what winning even means. Miyazaki says that Sekiro was meant to be an action-adventure game, not another extension of the studio's earlier action RPG formula, and the posture system was presented as an evolution of their signature combat system and not just simple tweaking. Posture is the hidden dual state behind the whole combat loop. You pressure the enemy, deflect at the last possible moment, break their stance, and finish with a death blow instead of working slowly on a fixed health bar. That proved to be the major combat upgrade for Souls veterans, because the instinct to back off, circle, and play safe, which was their usual combat maneuver, is less effective here than staying in the opponent's face. Here's another interesting insight into how Sekiro modernized Miyazaki's combat vision. From Software and PlayStation described Sekiro's jump as a complete change to combat, because it asks your complete attention in 3 dimensions, while the grappling hook opens up vertical routes and new angles of attack. That is a huge contrast with the more grounded tone of earlier Souls combat, where positioning mattered, but the battlefield usually stayed flat and more like a typical battleground. Sekiro pushes duels into something faster and more reactive, especially when you are fighting larger groups and using stealth or the prosthetic to control your every strike. There is also a very strange little Death Note layer that makes the system turn even more aggressive. In the pre-launch interview, Activision explains that Resurrection was tuned not as a helping option, but as a risk mechanic. You can use death to your advantage, even luring your enemies into a false sense of security. And the demo even had an item specifically meant to let the player kill themselves for the tactical edge. And did you know, they even included a combat tool specifically for that tactic? Bloodsmoke Ninjutsu is a crowd control tool built for these multi-enemy situations. That is why the game feels familiar at first, then starts demanding a completely different combat language. I mean, talking about a Miyazaki masterpiece, whoever thought about the Shinobi prosthetic deserves a cliché award. The Shinobi prosthetic is one of the clearest examples of From Software tuning a lore object into a combat mechanic. Miyazaki said the arm was designed to represent variety in one place, vertical traversal, and a wide set of tools all packed into a single device. Since a shinobi doesn't fight fair, he fights till he is victorious. Since Sekiro's combat is framed around the violence of sword clashes and dynamic movement, it is a part of the core language of the game. Lore-wise, it was made by Dogen for the sculptor, then handed down to Wolf after Genichiro cuts off his arm, and the sculptor brings him to the dilapidated temple. What makes the upgrade system so good is that every branch feels like a tiny lore joke with a gameplay payoff. Sekiro has 10 prosthetic tools. Only 3 can be equipped at once, and each use costs a spirit emblem. The upgrade tree uses scrap iron, black gunpowder, and later, the rare lapis lazuli, which is the final tier material tied to the highest prosthetic upgrades. You can get only 6 lapis lazulis per playthrough, but 10 are needed in total. This means fully upgrading everything takes at least 2 runs. Choosing a certain ending will also lock you out of every lapis lazuli source in that cycle. The real trivia lies in the tool names. Robert's Firecrackers is a highly effective crowd control item. Its description says they were sold by Little Robert and his father who came to Japan seeking the Undying to save Robert's life. That detail spawned a lot of fan theories. I particularly liked the idea that Robert may be one of the children consumed by Senpo's immortality obsession, which we've already covered above. Another interesting take states that Robert's father was manipulated into guarding the bridge by false hope. And considering how destructive his starting weapon in the game is, Sabimaru has its own strange layer too. The blade's blue poison rust is said to have been used against the Okami warrior woman, which makes the Lazulite Sabimaru a super strong relic, and at the same time spiritually tied to Fountainhead's old enemies. Even the umbrella tools follow this pattern. Variants like Phoenix Lilac umbrella and Suzaku's Lotus umbrella sound almost ceremonial rather than mechanical. In short, this is Wolf's prosthetic system in a nutshell. Upgradable tools of chaos and destruction seamlessly helping you in a fluid sword-based combat system. Now I might just be speculating here, but this next Easter egg is hard to miss. When you get the Fulminated Mercury upgrade for the Shinobi prosthetic in Sekiro, the description says that the Central Army's power owes a lot to this tiny chemical trick. Now, where have we heard this before? That's right. It's a direct Breaking Bad reference. In the show, Walter White uses fulminated mercury in a scene that becomes one of the series' most famous moments. He drops it on the ground, it explodes with huge force, and he calls it a little tweak of chemistry. That is almost the same idea as the Sekiro item description. Something small, dangerous, and scientific can become a weapon far stronger than it looks. What makes this reference even better is that both moments are about intelligence being turned into power. Walter is not stronger than the people around him, but he uses his knowledge to control the room. Sekiro does something similar with the prosthetic. The arm does not rely on brute force. It uses tools, timing, and clever design to give Wolf an edge. Fulminated mercury fits that theme perfectly because it sounds harmless until it suddenly changes the whole fight. Fans love and usually expect these kind of details from Software, which often hides little nods like this in item names and descriptions. It may not be an actual official Breaking Bad crossover, but it feels like a deliberate wink. The idea is simple. Chemistry, when used the right way, can be just as deadly as a sword. And in Sekiro, that tiny upgrade proves it. One of the most interesting traversal routes in Sekiro involves the Great Serpent, and a lot of players miss it the first time. After the second encounter, if you make your way back through Senpo Temple and use the kite route, you can line up a plunge attack on the snake and finish it with 2 death blows. For most of us in our first playthroughs, this was a huge highlight, because the serpent had been looming over the world for hours by then. But there's a secret involved in this combat sequence. If you hesitate after the first death blow, the serpent swallows you whole and spits you out in the cave near the guardian ape. This boss-sized monster is not just a threat, but also a hidden fast travel route. That detail becomes even better when you look at the gameplay around it. The snake cave is tied to the dried serpent's viscera path, and the same area is often discussed by players as a clever shortcut, because being swallowed can place you close to the next part of the Sunken Valley route. Speedrunners often use this trick, mainly to save time and reach the cave near Guardian Ape faster. Fans also point out that the game gives you Puppeteer Ninjutsu right before this section, then asks you to use it on a nearby monkey to distract the serpent, which makes the whole sequence kinda planned rather than accidental. The result is a world event that works as a puzzle, a shortcut, and even a piece of monster logic all at once. One of Sekiro's smartest healing details sits in plain sight from the very beginning. The healing gourd in Emma's system for turning Ashina's medical water into something Wolf can carry and refill. Emma can upgrade the gourd with gourd seeds, and the item itself starts with only one use before growing into a much larger part of the game's survival loop. Gourd seeds are the upgrade items that increase how many times you can drink from the healing gourd at sculptor idols. What makes her a part of this system? She is a physician, a student of Dogen, and the one who handles dragon rot related healing through the recovery charm and dragon's blood droplets. Dragon rot is the sickness that spreads among NPCs when Wolf dies too much, which is why Emma's role matters mechanically as well as narratively. It's kind of a relationship. You bring her ingredients, she helps extend your life, and she also explains why the world keeps punishing reckless death. The upgrade names are a different story. They make the system even more personal. Emma's medicine, potency, and Emma's medicine, aroma, are latent skills that improve recovery items, with aroma explicitly said to have been taught by Emma to the sculptor long ago. Players have tested these skills and found that the bonus is real, but rather small, which fits Sekiro's overall balance. Healing gets better, but never enough to erase risk. A lot of fan discussion also centers on the word medicinal water itself. One take is that Emma studied the curved gourds found in poisonous and war-torn places. They learned they could generate self-replenishing medicine through their seeds. That makes the healing gourd feel less like a generic flask and more like a piece of Ashina's strange natural magic built from decay, field medicine, and very careful science. Here are some success stats for Sekiro. Over 10 million copies sold, numerous game awards collected. And did you know that Sekiro wasn't even started as its own idea? Early in development, the project was being explored as a new entry in the Tenchu series. And in case you missed it, Tenchu is a classic stealth franchise where you play as a ninja using tools, shadows, and silent kills instead of direct combat. That foundation explains a lot of Sekiro's DNA, especially the stealth mechanics, rooftop movement, and instant death blows from above. As development continued, Hidetaka Miyazaki and the team realized the game was growing beyond Tenchu's structure. They wanted tighter combat, a fixed protagonist, and a stronger focus on sword clashes rather than pure stealth. That is when they decided that they were onto something with this new project and shifted into a completely new IP. Instead of multiple playable ninjas like in Tenchu, you get one defined character, Wolf. This allowed the team to build mechanics like posture, deflection, and resurrection around a single combat style, which would not have fit cleanly into a traditional Tenchu game. You can still see clear Tenchu traces if you look closely. Stealth death blows, enemy awareness markers, and the use of gadgets like firecrackers all feel like evolved versions of older Tenchu systems. Even level design supports this idea. Many areas are built with vertical entry points, hidden paths, and patrol routes that reward patience before aggression. Players on forums and YouTube often point out that early Sekiro gameplay looks like Tenchu with Souls combat layered on top, which is a fair way to describe it. There is also a small Easter egg connection. Activision, which published Sekiro, had previously published Tenchu titles. That link is not accidental. It gave From Software a reason to revisit that style of game, even if the final result became something very different. In the end, Sekiro feels like a spiritual successor rather than a direct sequel built from Tenchu ideas, but redesigned with a completely new combat philosophy. I know we have talked about how Sekiro is different from other Souls games, But still, we expected some classic callbacks. The biggest one is the absence of the Moonlight Greatsword. This weapon has appeared in almost every major From Software title, from Demon Souls to Dark Souls and even Bloodborne, often acting as a hidden callback or reward for dedicated players. Sekiro breaks that pattern on purpose. Hidetaka Miyazaki pushed for a clean identity with no direct Souls carryovers. No stat builds, no weapon variety, and no legacy items. The focus stays on one blade and one combat system. Fans have searched for hidden references, but there is no confirmed Moonlight equivalent. That absence itself feels intentional. It signals that Sekiro is not part of the Souls lineage in the usual sense. It is a reset, built to stand on its own without relying on past symbols. Did you know that Kite at Senpo Temple is one of Sekiro's smartest little hidden systems? Because it looks decorative until you realize it is actually a route to the Great Serpent. You cannot do anything with it at first. But if you use Puppeteer Ninjutsu on the nearby enemy, he runs to the wheel and raises the kite for you, turning a dead-end prop into a working shortcut. Then, from the giant tree on the cliff, you can grapple onto it, cross the gap, and reach the serpent's path from above. This is something only seen in a game that has something to do with Miyazaki's vision. That design fits Miyazaki's approach to Sekiro very neatly, since he described the game's movement as built around grappling, stealth, and using the environment to gain an advantage before a fight even starts. Puppeteer Ninjutsu is a skill earned after the folding screen monkeys boss that lets you briefly control a defeated enemy, which is exactly why the kite puzzle works. The strange part is that the kite is not required for the main story. It becomes a Miyazaki masterclass lesson. In Sekiro, enemies, world events, and even in-game props can all be turned into tools. Sekiro features some of the most interesting achievements ever featured in the Souls games. The Great Colored Carp achievement is one of Sekiro's strangest world events. It starts like a simple fishing task and ends with a dead boss-sized koi in a completely different place. The process behind it is where all the fun lies. You ring the bell at the feeding grounds, feed the Great Colored Carp the correct bait, then you leave and return later to find its corpse at the Guardian Ape's watering hole, where you can take the Great White Whisker. That item progression is what makes the trophy feel so offbeat. The game treats a giant fish like a quest target, but the reward is basically a corpse check and a rare crafting item. The bait system is where the hidden logic gets weird. Precious bait gives treasure carp scales, while truly precious bait is the irreversible choice that kills the carp after the area reloads. The two pot nobles, Harunaga in Hinata Estate and Koremori in Fountainhead Palace, can each give you that special bait after enough scale trading. And we have already discussed the lapis lazuli, which is the rare late-game upgrade material used for the strongest prosthetic tools, which is why the carp quest is tied to endgame progression as well as the trophy. Fans have spent years debating if a deeper lore meaning exists for this achievement. A common theory is that the truly precious bait is effectively poisonous, which fits the item text and explains why the carp dies after eating it. Another popular take is that the pot noble who receives the bait becomes a smaller red-eyed carp and takes over the other noble's stock, which makes the whole quest feel like a replacement ritual instead of a fishing reward. That is the part that really bends the mind. A side quest about feeding a fish becomes a story about power transfer, mutation, and who gets to inherit the merchant's place. YouTube guides mostly treat it as a route problem. but the community usually remembers it as one of From Software's most quietly disturbing secrets. A trophy about a carp, a bell, and a choice that turns a merchant into the next fish. Post-launch, Sekiro got a free update that changed how people practiced the game. The October 2020 Game of the Year patch added Reflection of Strength, Gauntlet of Strength, Remnants, and 3 unlockable outfits. Reflection of Strength lets you rematch bosses from any sculptor's idol, with your attack power adjusted to a fixed value while the fight is active, then returned afterward. While Gauntlet of Strength is the game's single life boss rush mode. If Wolf dies, the run restarts from the beginning. Trust me, this mode was not for the faint of heart. Consumables and spirit emblems are refunded after you finish the whole gauntlet, which keeps the challenge sharp without permanently costing resources. Remnants are the strangest part. You can record up to 30 seconds of gameplay, add a short message, and leave it for other players to watch and rate. This feature can even restore HP when someone praises your remnant. So a clever route or clean deflect chain can become a tiny support tool for strangers. The outfit updates followed through. From Software added 3 cosmetic looks, including Tengu and Old Ashina Shinobi, and the official notes make it clear they do not add any gameplay benefit. Back when the update dropped, the countless debate threads on Reddit showed how big the drop felt to fans, with players immediately discussing the boss rush and the new skins. YouTube breakdowns followed the same pattern, with creators making day one videos focused on boss rush, online features, and the new update systems. A lot of players saw the update as a late-game gift, but it also works like a design statement. Sekiro was built around mastery, and the new modes simply gave players better ways to prove they had it. Sekiro launched as a straight purchase, with no microtransactions planned for the game. In a 2018 report shared on Reddit, Activision's PR representative said there were no plans for microtransactions in Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice, and the same launch period was full of fan posts praising it as a complete single-player package. Needless to say, that was a huge plus for the game's marketing, because the game already had a hard, self-contained economy. You earn spirit emblems, upgrade tools, and push through bosses by learning the system, not by buying help. YouTube reviewers picked up on that right away, calling out the lack of loot boxes and microtransactions as part of why Sekiro felt like it was a purist's dream game when compared with many modern releases. Fans still bring it up because Sekiro is an old-school complete release. No shop pop-ups, no boost packs, no pay-to-win shortcuts. Just one sword, one shinobi, and the player's skill. That is why the no microtransactions detail keeps showing up in Reddit threads years later as one of the game's biggest points of praise. Remember the Dark Souls series and Elden Ring? What was that one point that made us all think more like a strategist and less like a casual gamer? The infamous RPG systems that gave us the stat builds. Sekiro does something entirely different. It strips away the usual RPG stat grind and replaces it with skill trees for Wolf's combat art and prosthetic style. In Miyazaki's words, the point was to let players unlock every facet of a multi-talented ninja, instead of locking progress behind strength, magic, or build choices the way Dark Souls does. He also said this avoided the old problem where a player hits a tough enemy, realizes they need a different stat spread, and has to backtrack just to pass one wall. That design choice changes the whole feel of the game. Sekiro gives you one katana, one fixed character, and a skill system built around mastery rather than character building. Miyazaki described the core idea as a shinobi who must use everything in your arsenal. And that skill tree is how the game lets you grow without turning Wolf into a traditional RPG avatar. And here's the interesting part. The game looks tighter on paper, but it is actually more demanding. You are not farming stats to outscale a boss. You are learning timing, deflects, movement, and tool use until the system clicks. That is why Sekiro feels so different, even though it still comes from the same studio. Talking about the new things Sekiro did, the eavesdropping mechanic is one of those small systems that change how you read the whole game. All you need to do is climb up a tree or crawl behind your enemies as close as you can, then trigger the eavesdrop, and not only do you get a glimpse into their lives, but also valuable info that might help you find the next location clue or an interesting boss fight. Miyazaki said in a translated Famitsu interview that eavesdropping was tied to the fun of the exploration, because players could hear enemy conversations before battle and use that information to build new strategies. That makes the mechanic feel like a hidden note system built into the world itself. The clever part is how little the game explains. Just stop and listen through a wall, a corner, or a doorway. You find a story trigger. Here, your movement, stealth, and map layout all require that you search for spaces from above and plan your approach instead of charging in. The eavesdrop mechanic is basically the stealth version of that design idea. The environment is a route and a source of intelligence. The biggest payoff comes from the ending routes. For fans who just opted for either one of the basic endings, deleted the game, and moved back to Mario Kart, there's a hidden ending in Sekiro that you probably missed out on. It requires a chain of dialogue and eavesdrops with Kuro, Emma, and the sculptor. After that, Emma gives Father's Bell Charm, which opens the second Hirata Estate memory. This optional listening mechanic is directly tied to one of the game's most important secret paths, and Miyazaki made sure to always keep the players on their toes while they were completing the main story missions. The Demon of Hatred is one of Sekiro's most hidden bosses, and the game makes you work to even understand what you are looking at. He appears at the Ashina Castle gate during the final invasion, has 3 death blow counters, and the fight is completely optional. In Japanese, his name is often given as Oni of Deeply Held Resentment, which already tells you this is less of a beast fight and more of a human collapse made visible. The weirdest part is that the boss is strongly tied to the sculptor, and the game lets you uncover that through secret dialogue if you keep up with his eavesdrops, talk to Emma, and trigger the right steps with sake and dragonrot events. Players on Reddit spent a lot of time mapping that out because the reveal is easy to miss on a normal run. The sculptor's Flames dialogue also foreshadows the transformation long before the arena fight starts, which is Miyazaki's way of staying focused on what my characters are saying throughout. A lot of players have also noticed that this boss feels different from the rest of Sekiro's combat flow. Players commented on Reddit that the fight leans closer to a Souls-style rhythm because dodging and spacing matter here more than standard posture pressure. That reaction is part of why the Demon of Hatred stands out so much. It is a late-game secret boss that looks like lore, plays like a warning, and reveals its identity only if you have paid attention all the way through. The death blow is one of Sekiro's biggest Tenchu carryovers, and Miyazaki said that the idea came from the original Tenchu releases rather than from Dark Souls' backstab animations or Bloodborne's visceral attacks, which are my personal favorite. A death blow comes from sneaking up on an enemy using stealth or from creating a brief posture weakness, almost like the reward for setting up the kill instead of just landing a critical hit. That is why the mechanics are so different from Souls combat. You are trying to break the fight open, then finish it with one clean strike. Fans of From Software remember Tenchu as the early Miyazaki highlight. It was a pioneer in the stealth ninja games, and that lineage shows up here in the stealth kill setup, the rooftop routes, and the obsession with finding an opening before the blade comes down. Sekiro's combat can be simplified as swords clashing until a moment of weakness appears. Take the opportunity and you get the satisfying sound of a sword penetrating the enemy. The effect is quite graphic, and there aren't many different animations, but after the same enemy has staggered your posture 17 times in the last 5 minutes, Death Blow becomes the player's ultimate satisfaction. That is the real Tenchu adaptation, not just silent assassination, but a full combat system built around the final blow. Back when the game was first released, the resurrection system was the controversial setting that many players expected to ease the combat experience. But man, were they wrong. The resurrection system is one of the smartest things From Software has built into the game. Activision said it was added to keep the pace moving between encounters, and Miyazaki told GameSpot that it was not meant to make the game easier, but to preserve the rhythm and pressure of death. What happens is, as you die a gruesome death, it does not always end the attempt. Wolf can revive right away, and the UI even shows 2 pink-red revive orbs that refill in different ways. One comes back at an idol, and the other is restored by landing death blows. That is why the title says, Shadows Die Twice. In my opinion, it should just be called Shadows Die a lot. What makes it so clever is the trade-off. Death still hurts. Wolf loses experience, progress, and half his money on death. And the game has an option called Unseen Aid, with a small chance to avoid that loss. So the resurrection system is not a free extra life button. It is more like a tactical reset that asks whether you can turn a bad fight into a better position. Now here's the interesting twist. Did you know that every time Wolf is resurrected, the world around him is affected by a mysterious disease called dragon rot? It's not like Millennia's scarlet rot, which just turns everyone corrupted and crazy. Instead, it is the sickness that spreads to NPCs when Wolf dies repeatedly. GameSpot notes that infected characters start coughing. Some questlines lock up, and Emma becomes the person who helps create the cure through Dragon Tear. That is the mind-bending part of the resurrection system. The game gives you a second chance, then turns your failure into a problem for the whole world around you. It is a death mechanic that keeps score in story terms, not just gameplay terms. Sekiro's setting was not picked just because Japan sounded cool. From Software said the game was first framed around 3 keywords: Japanese-inspired, Japanese aesthetic, and ninja. The Sengoku period was Japan's warring states era, and Miyazaki said they chose it over the Edo period because it felt dirtier, more violent, and more medieval, which matched the kind of world they wanted to build. He also said the ending years of the Sengoku period had a special kind of finality which fit the game's mood very well. The other big reason was freedom of movement. Miyazaki said that the ninja concept made 3-dimensional travel feel natural, and that the team wanted players to use mobility, stealth, and everything in your arsenal as part of combat. He also pointed out that Sekiro was not meant to be a direct continuation of any existing From Software series, even though Tenchu was a major inspiration. And for those of you who don't know what Tenchu is, It was a stealth ninja series that helped define the silent kill side of Sekiro's design. From Software also said they did not want the world to feel like a straight historical recreation. Kitao explained that they took inspiration from architecture and vegetation, but did not include actual historical people or locations. That is why Sekiro feels rooted in real Japanese history without turning into a museum piece. It borrows the look and war-torn feel of Sengoku Japan, then layers in From Software's usual mystery, supernatural elements, and strange folklore on top. The setting gives the game its identity before Wolf even swings a sword. Miyazaki never fully reveals what's happening in his games. Take Elden Ring, for example. So we won't do that either. But there are some characters who we see a lot during the main story cutscenes. The sculptor is one of those characters in Sekiro because he is the main link between the game's combat system and its lore. In the opening, he is the aging man who gives Wolf the shinobi prosthetic and sets the whole story in motion. Miyazaki also confirmed that the sculptor's idol is the game's bonfire equivalent and that the old man in the trailer is the one carving those idols. This means that whenever we reach the save points, we're paying a visit to the same man who built Wolf's fighting future. The sculptor's backstory is especially interesting, relating to themes of betrayal. In dialogue, he reveals that Dogen made the prosthetic as a gift for him, which means the weapon system Wolf uses throughout the game was first created for the sculptor himself. The same conversations also connect him to Emma, whom he found on a battlefield, and to Ishin Ashina, who cut off his left arm to stop him from becoming Shura. This was the key to his whole character. And now we can share a little bit about the ending. Shura is the state where a shinobi becomes consumed by endless killing. The sculptor already lived as the Shura, which is why he is now found in the dilapidated temple, carving Buddha statues as a kind of punishment and self-control. His own dialogue makes that fear clear. After certain story triggers, he speaks about seeing nothing but flames. Lore-wise, we already know he's the first Sekiro-verse character to be consumed by the mindless killing state. It shows you that his past is still burning despite his best efforts to control himself. His story also leads to Sekiro's biggest secrets, the demon of hatred. The game quietly turns the sculptor's buried violence into a boss fight, which is why players who keep up with the eavesdrops and sake conversations get a much clearer picture of who he used to be. Sekiro rarely explains things directly, but with the sculptor, the pieces are all there if you listen closely enough. Back when the game was first released, Miyazaki had just finished closing the Dark Souls trilogy, and he made it clear in interviews that Sekiro would not continue that formula. Fans saw a hard shift they loved to hate. No RPG stats, no armor builds, no weapon variety. Instead, the focus moves to one character, one sword, and a completely new combat system built around posture and deflection. The studio used Sekiro as a clean break after Dark Souls 3, resetting their design approach. We all know they returned to the same format in Elden Ring, but 2019 was the year of great financial posture for From Software. Fans often point out that Sekiro was a post-Souls experiment, where From Software kept the challenge and removed the traditional RPG layer. There are still small familiar ideas like checkpoints and punishing death systems, but the overall structure is very different. The Mortal Blade is one of the most important items in Sekiro, and it is also one of the clearest examples of the game tying lore to progression. Its item description says it is an odachi that can slay the undying, and it carries the true name Gracious Gift of Tears. It also unlocks the Mortal Draw combat art, which gives Wolf a heavy, high damage slash that casts spirit emblems and hits harder than a normal swing. An Odachi is a very large Japanese sword, longer and heavier than a standard katana. You get this blade from the Divine Child of Rejuvenation in the inner sanctum of Senpo Temple after beating the folding screen monkeys in the Halls of Illusion. The game also makes that pickup matter in a big way. Once you collect the Mortal Blade, the Lotus of the Palace, and the Shelter Stone, the first Ashina Castle invasion is triggered, and most of the castle idols shut down. That is a very From Software move, because a key item is never just a key item. It is a world state switch. Take the example of Radahn's fight in Elden Ring. The whole map changes, and the region of Nokron opens up. Lore-wise, the blade exists to sever immortality, which is why Wolf uses it on targets like the True Monk, the Headless Ape, and Hanbei. It is also required to draw Kuro's blood for the ending route. The Black Scroll later hints at a second Mortal Blade, and the Black Mortal Blade is tied to Open Gate, the weapon that summons Ishin in the final act. That is why fans spend so much time arguing about it online. The dev side lines up with that theme. Miyazaki said Sekiro's whole combat identity came from the idea of a risky ninja fight, where death, resurrection, and clever use of violence all matter at once. The Mortal Blade fits that perfectly. It is not a normal sword upgrade. It is a story weapon built for a game obsessed with death and combat mechanics. Fan theories mostly orbit the Black Mortal Blade about whether Open Gate literally means what the command says. Does it open a literal passage to the underworld? We also wonder if Ishin's return was tied to that gate, and whether the Black Blade works differently from the red one. The game never truly spells it out, but you wonder. The game has enough gaps for that kind of debate, and Sekiro fans have not stopped filling them since launch. For a game with such a focus on combat, it's only natural for the developers to make creative choices in different encounters. One of Sekiro's coolest combat tricks is that you can literally set your sword on fire. The cleanest version is Flame Vent plus Living Force. The prosthetic launches flame, then Living Force coats Wolf's blade so the next few swings hit with fire damage. Living Force is the combat art that turns a prosthetic blast into a temporary weapon buff. Extra Life and Player Guides both note that the Lazulite Sacred Flame version can also behave like a Divine Confetti style buff, which is why it's considered one of the best burst tools. And that's just the start. There are many item buffs you can find in the game. Divine Confetti boosts damage against all enemies, not just apparitions. And Redditor threads from launch were full of players testing how it stacks with sugar buffs. The answer the community settled on is simple. Divine Confetti stacks with sugars, but two different sugars cannot stack with each other. That is where the really weird risk-reward stuff comes in. Akko's sugar raises attack power for a short time, while Yashariku's sugar hits much harder but cuts your vitality and posture in half. So the whole buff system is built around a simple idea. Take a temporary advantage, then cash it in before the fight swings back. Players call these tools prep buffs. You see it in guide videos, Reddit fights, and boss rush clips. Confetti first, sugar second, then fire or heavy combat art to force the opening. It feels like a small detail, but in Sekiro, it often decides the whole fight. And there are some fights that you just absolutely love for their broken structure. This next point is Miyazaki's signature world building. Even though the whole world seems fluid and structured when it comes to boss fights, you can still take some insane shortcuts to skip a lot of stuff. And by stuff, I mean frustratingly difficult enemies like the Divine Dragon, Great Shinobi Owl, or the Shichimen warriors. No doubt, you can take the long route through Ashina Castle and still end up staring Genichiro in the face at the top of the tower. But there is also a much faster way in. From the castle entrance, you can cut to the right, grapple up the rooftops, push past the man calling out from the kite section, and keep climbing until the roof line drops you right into the castle tower lookout fight. The game quietly rewards that kind of route planning because Sekiro is built around vertical movement as much as combat. On the first proper castle rematch, he realizes sword work and arrows are not enough, and he shifts into the way of Tomoe, a lightning-based style passed down by his mentor, Lady Tomoe. That is the point where his role changes from boss blocking your path to man trying to save a dying country by any means left. When you beat him at that stage, you essentially force Ashina's heir to show how desperate he has become, and the rest of the game opens up with that desperation hanging over everything. We will be talking a lot more about Lady Tomoe because Sekiro features an entire lore dump about a character you never actually meet face to face. Tomoe is described as a master of the sword and Genichiro's mentor, and the game says her fighting style looked almost like dancing. Her eyes were said to feel like they were pulling you into deep water. She also lives inside the school of Tomoe, the lightning-heavy style Genichiro uses later in the game, so we can say that her influence is built into one of Sekiro's most important bosses. There's a unique item called Tomoe's Note. It is a key item that gives away part of her backstory. The note says Takeru's coughs are getting worse, as she wants to sever the dragon's heritage and restore his humanity, and that doing so would require the Everblossom and the Mortal Blade. It also says the Mortal Blade was hidden by the High Priest of Senpo Temple. This blade ties Tomoe to the Divine Heir's story, the immortality problem, and the secret ending route all at once. Takeru was the earlier Divine Heir from Sekiro's backstory, which is why Tomoe keeps showing up in the same lore cluster as Kuro. Immortality and purification. There is no standalone Lady Tomoe boss fight in the retail game. The closest thing you get is Genichiro, Way of Tomoe, whose final phase borrows her lightning style and even gives him his own mortal blade. Games Radar notes that his fight is basically the second Genichiro battle, and that the lightning phase changes the tempo completely, with aggressive pressure and lightning reversal being the safest answer. This is the From Software version of a reveal. The person is absent, but the combat and the clues keep her alive. Speaking of things that help you stay alive, let's discuss some technical changes in the release of patch 1.03 that made life easier for a lot of Sekiro players. It softened a few of Sekiro's rough edges. The biggest nerf was the Blazing Bull. Its posture and vitality were reduced to improve pacing, so the fight would end faster, even though the attack pattern stayed the same. The patch also lowered the spirit emblem cost of several prosthetics and combat arts, including Lazarlight's Sacred Flame, the Axe series, Ashina Cross, Dragon Flash, One Mind, Floating Passage, Spiral Cloud Passage, Mortal Draw, and Empowered Mortal Draw. On top of that, Senpo Leaping Kicks and High Monk had their first hit posture damage reduced, while Sabimaru got a poison buff against enemies weak to it. From Software also bumped up divine confetti drops from Ashina Castle fences, which helped with apparition fights. Overall, The patch made Sekiro's tools more usable without changing the game's identity. And then, of course, there's the Chained Ogre, the first real wall Sekiro throws at players who think aggression alone will carry them through the game. He is a mini-boss found at Outskirts Wall Stairway. And later, another version shows up inside Ashina Castle once the world state changes. The name is blunt on purpose. A giant humanoid creature bound in chains, raging in place until you get close enough to trigger him. The chains are there because someone expected this thing to lose control. He drops a prayer bead, which increases Wolf's vitality and posture when combined into a necklace. What makes this fight memorable is the 9 red-eyed detail. Sekiro has a separate category for red-eyed enemies, and the community quickly figured out that they are vulnerable to fire. So, after a lot of experimentation with all fire-based arts and buffs, the flame vent becomes the obvious choice for tackling the Chained Ogre. Even though a lot of players miss it on their first run, the ogre is designed to force a lesson. When the game gives you a monster that shrugs off normal pressure, you are supposed to stop mashing and start using your prosthetics, spacing, and the environment. The lore gets dark once you connect the red eyes to Ashina's experiments. The second prayer bead description directly links the Chained Ogre to those who have red eyes, and notes that fire is especially effective against them. It lines up perfectly with what you learn later in the abandoned dungeon. Dojun is running human experiments there, and he is openly trying to recreate strength and resilience using the rejuvenating waters. Rejuvenating waters are a corrupted form of immortality tied to Senpo Temple and Ashina's desperation to survive war. They grant unnatural vitality, but they also twist the body and mind over time. That is where the red eyes start to make sense. They are essentially a symptom of these cruel experimentations. A common theory trending on Reddit is that the red-eyed enemies are an early stage or failed attempts at weaponizing the waters, while later enemies like the Headless or Guardian Ape represent more advanced but still broken outcomes. The game never confirms this theory, but leaves the audience with enough ambiguity to speculate all they want. Then, patch 1.03 confirmed that From Software was still paying attention to this enemy long after launch. The update gave the Ashina Castle Chained Ogre the red-eyed status, matching the first one, and tightened the logic around the fight. Sake has a long history in Japan, and Miyazaki uses this cultural reference masterfully in the game. Japanese brewing traditions go back more than 1,000 years, and sake has long been used in ceremonies, festivals, and purification rituals, so it carries the idea of sharing memory and ritual that is characteristic of the cultural background of the Sengoku era. In Sekiro, the 4 sake items are not combat consumables at all. Ashina Sake, Unrefined Sake, Monkey Booze, and Dragon Spring Sake are dialogue keys you can hand to Ishin, Emma, or the sculptor to unlock extra lore conversations, and they carry over into New Game Plus. Think of them as hidden story branches rather than loot, because each drink opens a different memory or confession. In a game that has very little storytelling exposition, sake seems to break the natural order of how Elden Ring and Dark Souls used to work narratively. Ashina Sake is the most grounded one. Emma's version even gets a slightly different description, and it ties the drink to Ashina itself rather than the fountainhead waters. Dragon Spring Sake is a different story. It is linked to the divine waters of Fountainhead Palace, and one of its key sources is an Okami swordsman in the palace. The best part is the dialogue. Monkey Booze opens up the sculptor's past with the apes, the battlefield, and the reason Ishin cut off his arm, while also giving Emma and Ishin their own extra stories. Unrefined Sake pulls out the more tragic, personal side of the cast, including the line of thoughts around Tomoe, Shura, and the old wounds that never healed. Reddit and YouTube compilations became popular because players realized these drinks were basically lore archives hidden in your inventory. There is even a little Easter egg in the language. When Ishin and the sculptor talk about sake, the game slips in a pun for my sake, which fans love because it sounds like a joke and a confession at the same time. In Sekiro, sake might just be a collectible item in the menu, but it reveals more backstory than half the bosses combined. Sekiro does not use the word undead the way Dark Souls does. It usually talks about people being undying or infested, and the game splits that idea into several forms. Hanbei the Undying is the clearest tutorial example. A named character who cannot stay dead exists as a practice partner. In the manga tie-in, it is described as an immortal or infested. As for the enemies, Senpo Temple gives you weak immortal monks, stronger versions with centipedes crawling out of them, and later, the corrupted monk fight, where a centipede bursts from the neck mid-battle. That is Sekiro's undead family in a nutshell. The lore starts with the holy chapter, Infested. Its item text says, "To be undying is to walk the eternal path to enlightenment," which is the game's most direct hint that the monks have wrapped their immortality obsession in religious language. The main hall monk also explains that the special holy person at Senpo Temple is the divine child, and he hands over the chapter so he can learn the reason for her fate. That means the whole temple is already circling the same question. What is this thing that they are calling holiness, and why does it keep producing monsters? A lot of the origin theories are part of these three factions. One says the source is the rejuvenating waters, which the game clearly ties to Ashina's failed immortality research and the corrupted bodies that result from it. Another says that the centipedes are the real cause, with the waters acting as a carrier or catalyst. A third theory, popular in community posts, treats the palace nobles and the carp quest as proof that Sekiro has multiple immortality systems running at once, not one single route. The game never fully confirms which is the true undead state, and that ambiguity is part of the design. The corrupted Buddhism theory is the most mind-bending one, and the item text practically invites it. In that reading, Senpo Temple's monks did not abandon enlightenment by accident. They redefined enlightenment as immortality, then trapped themselves in a state where they cannot die, reincarnate, or progress spiritually. The Reddit analysts puts it bluntly. They pursue the path to enlightenment, but their obsession keeps them from ever reaching it. That fits Sekiro's bigger theme too. Activision's pre-launch interview says, "Resurrection was built as a strategic advantage, but also as a way to keep the player fragile and risky." The same idea applies to the lore. Immortality looks like salvation until it becomes a curse that freezes everyone in place. Up until now, we haven't really discussed one key character deeply tied to the Sekiro lore. That's right, folks, it's time for the Lady Butterfly sermon. Sekiro uses her as both a lore reveal and a combat lesson. She is a kunoichi, a female shinobi, and Miyazaki confirmed in an interview that Owl raised Wolf and that Lady Butterfly was one of Owl's acquaintances from that shinobi circle. Game Informer also described Hirata Estate as a flashback, which is why the boss fight in this region has a dreamy feel to it. You find her at the end of Hirata Estate, inside the hidden temple, and the memory only opens after you receive the young lord's bell charm from the old woman in Ashina outskirts. Offer it to the Buddha at the dilapidated temple. A quick history lesson for those of you who just joined: a memory in Sekiro is a boss reward item that you use at a sculptor's idol to raise attack power. Lady Butterfly gives you memory Lady Butterfly when you beat her, which is why she matters so much so early. Her fight is where Sekiro starts teaching the player how to fight correctly. GameSpot and other guides point out that she is built around quick side movement, close-range posture, and punishing overcommits. Even though all these maneuvers are easier said than done, the safe bet is usually to stay aggressive and not greedy. In Phase 2, she summons illusions, and the common advice from guides and player testing is to use snap seeds to clear them, or simply run until the illusions turn into butterflies and vanish. Then hide behind the pillars to avoid the homing projectiles. Shuriken are also useful when she jumps onto the wires, because they can knock her back down. She trained in Usui Forest, a remote region north of Ashina, and the forest itself is tied to illusion techniques and secrecy. She is also linked to Takeru and Tomoe's wider immortality story through the Hirata flashback and later item clues, which is why fans read her as part of the same old network of shinobi, nobles, and failed attempts to stop the dragon's heritage from causing more damage. Game Informer's coverage frames the early Sekiro bosses as demonstrations of the new combat language, and multiple guides describe Lady Butterfly as the boss that teaches you to stop playing like Dark Souls and start using posture, spacing, and rhythm. Did you know one of Sekiro's closest Blight Town style stretches, the toxic townlands of Ashina Depths, and parts of Sunken Valley actually work very differently from Dark Souls' Poison Swamp? In the shipped game, here's how it works. Once you push past Ashina Castle and follow the hidden routes down into the valleys, you enter a zone packed with poison pools, gunfire, fire attacks, and narrow cliffs. The area feels dangerous at first, but Sekiro gives you tools Dark Souls did not. You can grapple with branches, leap across gaps, and break line of sight fast. So the level never traps you in the same way Blighttown did. If you move well, you are already escaping the hazard instead of slowly wading through it. Put together, the area is Sekiro's version of a brutal descent, but the grappling hook turns it into a fast vertical escape route instead of a chokehold. One of Sekiro's biggest mid-game twists happens when, about midway through the main story, it stops being a simple rescue mission and turns into a fight about loyalty, immortality, and betrayal. Sekiro starts from the idea of role-playing a ninja, with a world built for vertical movement, tense combat, and a fixed hero, Wolf. However, this is temporary since the game's narrative shifts from revenge and rescue into a deeper conflict over the dragon's heritage, the power Kuro carries, and the ritual needed for immortal severance, which means breaking the immortal bond. The twist lands when you return to Ashina Castle after the first big story push. At the top of the castle, where you already fought Genichiro, you meet Great Shinobi Owl, Wolf's adoptive father. The choice is a major story fork. Owl tries to pull Wolf into obeying the Iron Code, and if you stay loyal to Kuro, the game turns on Owl instead. Owl's boss design matches the twist perfectly. His fight is built around shinobi tricks, not brute force. He uses shuriken throws, a leaping follow-up slash, smoke bombs, and a toxic anti-heal bomb that blocks your gourd for a moment. The tables have turned on you. This is a veteran shinobi who wins by deception, spacing, and timing, the same way Wolf has to win now. This fight also pushes players to use the combat system more aggressively, since Owl punishes hesitation and rewards clean deflects and fast pressure. Owl is tied to Wolf's past. Kuro is tied to the dragon's heritage, and the whole story begins to point toward a much stranger world beyond Ashina, including the Divine Realm and Fountainhead Palace. Miyazaki did not spell that out in interviews, but he framed Sekiro as a game where the second half expands the story in a very different direction. Hidetaka Miyazaki is truly one of a kind. Just to keep the creative juices flowing, he does not treat one game as the only thing happening at the studio. During Sekiro's development, Terasine was also being made at the same time, and Miyazaki said working on more than one project helps keep his ideas fresh. Terasine was a completely different project from Sekiro in both the creative vision behind it and the game type. Since it was a production for PlayStation VR, Sekiro had a very focused design, one hero, one weapon, one movement style, and a combat system built around deflections and aggressive timing. When a studio is only locked onto one project, ideas can get stuck. Miyazaki's method seems to avoid that. He has done this before. Earlier in his career, From Software was also balancing different games under his direction, and later he was involved around the same period in projects like Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3. That history explains why his team often feels like they are testing different creative lanes at the same time. One project can push the atmosphere, while another pushes combat, speed, or world design. The strange part is that this style can leave little fingerprints in the final games. Sekiro feels very tight and deliberate, but Terasine shows Miyazaki was also thinking about quiet spaces, memory, and player interpretation. He does not want every game to repeat the last one. He wants each project to feed the next, so the studio keeps moving forward instead of cloning its own success. The Mushin esoteric text is the late-game scroll that unlocks Mushin arts, Sekiro's final combat art tree. The name comes from Mushin, a martial arts term that means no mind or a calm state where action happens without hesitation. In Sekiro, that idea fits the whole system well because the tree is built around the top-end techniques from the other schools. It is also tied to Ashina Mushin, the compound style associated with young Isshin Ashina, who is said to have built it by combining techniques he picked up from different schools. If we look at its gameplay sequence, this is one of the most valuable scrolls in the game because it opens the ultimate side of Sekiro's combat. Think of it like unlocking Avada Kedavra at the end of Hogwarts Legacy. You become super overpowered instantly. The tree includes High Monk, Shadow Rush, Ashina Cross, Living Force, Shadowfall, Spiral Cloud Passage, and Empowered Mortal Draw. High Monk extends Senpo-style attacks with extra kicks and slashes. Shadow Rush is a long-range thrust. Ashina Cross is a very fast sheathed draw cut. Living Force lets you follow a prosthetic attack and coat your sword with the tool's effect. Shadowfall turns Shadow Rush into a spinning follow-up. Spiral Cloud Passage throws out powerful shockwaves. Empowered Mortal Draw is a stronger charged version of Mortal Draw with wider ranged damage. The unlock path is easy to miss. You first need to master the final combat art in any other skill tree. Then, the Tengu of Ashina can hand over the Mushin esoteric text at the Great Serpent Shrine area. If you miss that window, Emma can later give it to Wolf after the Divine Dragon fight. as long as the requirement is met. There is a neat lore detail here too. The whole idea of no mind matches Sekiro's combat design, where the best play comes from reading, reacting, and striking without panic. The scroll is basically the game's way of saying you have learned enough to fight like a master. Speaking of mastering combat in Sekiro, what better way to boast this mastery than using death to your combat advantage? After you reach the late game and return to the dilapidated temple, Sekiro gives you a tiny item with a very specific use: Hidden Tooth. You only get it after the mortal blade is obtained, and you speak to Hanbei the Undying, who asks Wolf to end his curse. Agree to that, and then beat Hanbei in that follow-up encounter. He drops the item and disappears from the game. Here's what happens gameplay-wise. Using Hidden Tooth instantly kills Wolf, but it does not lock out the rest of your resurrection state the way a normal death can. In practice, that means you can force a reset, keep your revive chain available, and sometimes clear enemy aggression so guards walk back to position and leave openings for a backstab. Players also use it as a panic option in boss fights when they are low on health, out of healing, and still sitting on extra resurrection power. Death can be controlled, timed, and even used as part of survival. Who would have thought of that except the likes of Miyazaki? When you start Sekiro, you get the grappling hook almost immediately. With it, you unlock one of the most important systems in the game: Shinobi shortcuts. These are hidden traversal routes built into the environment. They let you bypass enemies instead of fighting straight through them. They are not marked on the map, so you need to find them by watching for grapple points and testing vertical space. In Ashina Castle, you can cross rooftops to avoid entire patrol groups and reach sculptor's idols without losing health. In Harata Estate, you can move alongside paths and rooftops to isolate enemies and land stealth death blows before they can react. In Sunken Valley, grapple chains along cliffs lets you skip rifle squads that can otherwise chip away your vitality before a boss. In Ashina Depths, tree routes let you move over poison pools instead of walking through them. But the system goes further. Many mini-bosses are placed with at least one shortcut route that lets you take off a full health bar with a stealth death blow. That is a clear gameplay scenario. Scout the area, find the route, drop in, and start the fight with an advantage. It is consistent across the game. And here's how you expand over time. The grappling hook opens the base routes. Skills like Mikiri counter and tools like loaded shuriken make those routes stronger because you can engage enemies instantly after repositioning. The game does not lock these shortcuts behind keys. It expects you to unlock them by observation, movement, and learning how the level is built. This makes traveling across the map much more interesting compared to riding torrents towards a certain earth tree. Hanbei the Undying is the backbone of how you learn the combat system in Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. He's the calm, bandaged warrior standing near the dilapidated temple, and from the moment you meet him, he becomes your safest way to practice. Hanbei is infested, which means a parasitic creature inside his body keeps him alive even after death. In simple terms, he cannot die through normal means, so he offers himself as a sparring partner. Gameplay-wise, Hanbei is where you learn the core mechanics without pressure. He teaches deflect timing, perilous attacks, and counters like Mikiri counter in controlled drills. You can attack freely, fail, reset, and try again without losing progress or resources. That makes him one of the few places in the game where mistakes carry no penalty. It is a clear gameplay scenario. Practice here, then apply those skills against real enemies and bosses. But his role goes beyond training. After you progress the story and obtain the Mortal Blade, you unlock new dialogue with Hanbei. He reveals that he is tired of endless life and asks Wolf to end it. If you accept and defeat him in that final spar, Hanbei finally dies for real and rewards you with the hidden tooth, which we've just discussed. Hanbei shows the darker side of immortality. While Kuro's dragon heritage grants resurrection with purpose, Hanbei's infested state is a curse without meaning. His existence ties directly to the game's main lesson. Immortality always has a cost. Did you know there is a unique distraction mechanism in the game that's linked to your prosthetic upgrade system? The finger whistle prosthetic is one of the more unusual tools in Sekiro. It is a shinobi upgrade that lets Wolf emit a sharp whistle to distract or move enemies instead of dealing direct damage. You unlock it by defeating the guardian ape and using the item it drops to upgrade your prosthetic at the sculptor. In gameplay, the whistle has two main uses. First, it can draw enemy attention. If you are hidden, enemies will move toward the sound, letting you split groups and set up stealth death blows. This is useful in areas with multiple guards where direct combat would be risky. Second, it has a special effect on beast-type enemies. Stronger versions of the whistle can stun or even enrage beasts, causing them to attack anything nearby, including other enemies. Possibilities. Using it is simple. You activate the prosthetic, consume spirit emblems, and position yourself carefully before triggering the sound. Timing is super important, because enemies will investigate the last known location of the noise. Good use involves line-of-sight control, staying hidden, and combining it with movement routes or stealth approaches. Compared to distraction tools in other games, the finger whistle works more like a controlled lure than a basic noisemaker. In many stealth games, a thrown object creates a one-time distraction. A popular but related distraction maneuver can be seen in Hideo Kojima's Metal Gear Solid: The Phantom Pain. Snake bangs on his artificial prosthetic to make a sharp sound to call any nearby enemies. However, Sekiro's whistle exceeds the pros, since it's not only reusable, but you can also interact differently with enemy types, especially animals. Like always, die-hard Souls gamers love subtle callbacks whenever or wherever they can get them. In the later Hirata Estate memory, you run into Owl near the bamboo thicket slope. He's not there for a full fight yet. He is wounded, sitting still. The scene only appears after you have already moved far enough through Sekiro's main story to unlock the revisited memory. So by then, the game has already shifted from the opening rescue setup into the larger conflict around Kuro, the Iron Code, and Owl's real motives. Enough lore dump. Now you're ready for the Easter egg. Owl says, "I'm afraid I made a bit of a blunder." In Sekiro, Owl seems a little smug, tired, and too casual for a man who is also manipulating Wolf's path. The line appears in the same scene where he pushes you toward the hidden estate path. Then comes the callback. Eileen, the crow from Bloodborne, says a near identical line. "I'm afraid I've made a bit of a blunder." It is spoken by a wounded Eileen's late-stage encounter at the Grand Cathedral. The detail is easy to miss, but it is a very From Software-style nod to a small line of dialogue that connects two different worlds without explaining itself. Even if you fall, uphold the path to bring your master home, for you are my shinobi. I have witnessed a Shura once before, the mortal blade. These words shaped Wolf's journey, the young shinobi who is destined for greatness. And there have been few characters in Sekiro who matter more than Kuro, the divine heir. As the lore goes, he is a young boy born into the dragon's heritage, a bloodline tied to immortality. The power makes him a political target from the start. because Ashina is losing its war against the Interior Ministry and Genichiro Ashina wants Kuro's blood to protect the clan and save his country. That is why the game opens with Kuro as a captive. His being captured is symbolic of his importance in the game. It is what his blood can do, and that is exactly why everyone wants him. When you finally meet him in the game, he gives Wolf Kusabi Maru and the healing gourd in the tutorial. Then you need to find a way out of Ashina. After that, Genichiro takes him away anyway, and the whole story locks onto one goal: bring the divine heir home. Later, Kuro is found again at Ashina Castle, then in Kuro's room, where he pushes Wolf towards severing immortality instead of using it. The story keeps circling back to him because his bloodline is the thing everyone is fighting over. The key dialogue does most of the heavy lifting. At the start, Kuro says, "Kusabimaru, your sword, my shinobi." Later, the game repeats the bond in one of its most important lines: "For you are my shinobi." By the late game, he is still trusting Wolf with the mission, telling him, "I am counting on you, Wolf." Those lines resonate deeply in Wolf's mind, and his impending choice between obeying the Iron Code and protecting Kuro at any cost. Miyazaki also said Sekiro was designed as a story conferred on a specific main character, unlike earlier From Software games, in that the game's story would be easier to follow because the protagonist is part of the plot from the start. He also said the lore would be delivered the From Software way, through dialogue, exploration, and eavesdropping instead of long direct explanations. Just how we like it. Sekiro has 4 endings, and the split point comes after the Great Shinobi Owl decision at Ashina Castle. Once you have reached the late game item hunt around the Guardian Ape and Corrupted Monk route. If you obey Owl, you lock into Shura, the early bad ending. Wolf turns on Kuro, then fights Emma and Ishin Ashina. If you stay loyal to Kuro, the other 3 endings stay open. Immortal Severance is the default path. Stay loyal to Kuro, finish the game, and give him only the Divine Dragon's tears. That ends the dragon's heritage by killing Kuro and breaking the immortal line. Purification needs extra steps after choosing Kuro. You must complete the Hidden Father's Belt Charm or Hirata Estate route. Then do the eavesdrop chain with Emma and the sculptor to unlock the alternate sacrifice ending. Return is the longest route. Stay loyal to Kuro, finish the Divine Child quest line, and bring back the extra ending item set, including Frozen Tears, so Kuro's heritage is sent home instead of severed. The replacement theme here is a recurring From Software idea. A defeated or released caretaker leaves behind a slot, and the player can end up occupying it. In Sekiro, that reading is strongest in Immortal Severance, where Wolf returns to the temple and takes up the sculptor's trade, waiting for the next shinobi. That is an interference from the ending, not a direct in-game speech line, but the visual and narrative set up points that way. Bloodborne does the same thing more directly. Refusing Gehrman leads to the Moon Presence fight, and if the hunter loses, they become Gehrman's replacement in the hunter's dream. In Dark Souls 2, taking the Throne of Want makes the bearer of the curse accept the monarch's role, whether that means linking the fire or letting it fade. That shared structure is the callback. Defeats the Old Keeper, then inherits the system they were holding together. This ending style was so loved that Miyazaki extended it in Elden Ring as well. In one of the endings, you do as you are told, that is, become the Elden Lord simply by collecting the minimum great runes required. So narratively, this does nothing new in the world. The Golden Order stays strong, with its extraterrestrial indulgence still on the whole world. You have just become their latest representative. Now, this next nod to Dark Souls left fans wondering for answers they can't have. Since Miyazaki loves to torture the players, not just with extremely hard combat, but also with curiosity. As you reach Hirata Estate by using the young lord's bell charm at the Buddha in the dilapidated temple, there is a bell hanging in Hirata Estate's main hall. It's just there as an environmental aesthetic, not a quest item or any gameplay relevance. But fans were quick to notice something peculiar about it. The bell is strikingly similar to the bell gargoyles in Dark Souls, the stone guardians tied to the Bell of Awakening in the Undead Parish. Fans have long pointed that out. Even after long, tiring fan debates on this, we have all come to the same conclusion. We know it's not a coincidence. We just can't prove it. Interestingly, Wolf can survive a lot in the game unless you stay vigilant and on your toes the entire time. However, there is one thing he's very good at. He can survive a very long fall and still roll back on his feet, like a true aura farmer. Why do they choose this mechanism for Wolf's character? Probably because Wolf has a grappling hook, which he needs to master. And when you're learning a grappling hook, you tend to fall a lot. We've all played Marvel's Spider-Man in the realistic physics mode. It's not easy as it sounds. Of course, there is just a theory behind a mechanic, but an educated one at that. He does not have no fall damage in the literal sense. The game features a much looser fall system than Dark Souls. Normal drops are often survivable, and the game gives you more room to recover with the grappling hook, ledges, and branch chains. You only die when you stumble over very huge falls, bottomless pits, or drop off the map. And even then, the damage is usually capped compared with Soul-style death falls. Fall damage is a standard part of map design. Once you cross the threshold, you lose a chunk of HP, and higher falls keep scaling up until they kill you. Sekiro also follows this mechanic, but the damage numbers are tuned to a faster gameplay where movement is vertical and aggressive. Speaking of surviving things that are harder than falling to death, block dancing is one of the most useful panic tools in Sekiro. When a combo starts coming in too hard to handle, you can tap guard repeatedly instead of trying to react cleanly to every swing. The game's deflect window is generous. Those fast taps can accidentally catch a hit as a deflect if the timing lines up. If it works, the enemy's pressure drops fast. If it fails to work, you still keep your guard up and avoid taking full damage right away. This is one of the most overpowered combat mechanics in the game. Forget prosthetic arts, sugars, and confetti. Just dance your way through the enemy's flurries, and on the first opening you get, roast them. Easy peasy, Japanesey. I wish it was that easy. This mechanic does come at a cost of posture damage. Every blocked hit pushes your posture higher, and if it fills up, you get broken and staggered. That can be dangerous, especially against bosses that can keep attacking right after your guard cracks. A bit of advice: use this tactic to get through only the basic enemies and learn to play the game for real before facing a boss fight. Still, block dancing is useful because many enemies cannot always punish posture breaks like you do. So it buys time, turning your panic mash into a few lucky deflects. It can also keep you alive long enough to recover, compose yourself, analyze what's going on, and wait for the combo to end. Now, it won't always go well for you when you start playing. Or should I say, it will never go well for you at all times. Meaning, you will die a lot. Now, here's the cruel thing Sekiro does to you. When you die, you lose 50% of your current sen and experience, unless Unseen Aid triggers. Unseen Aid is Sekiro's safety net. When Wolf suffers a true death, the game checks for a random chance to protect your sen and skill experience from being lost. and that chance is shown in the pause menu. With no dragon rot, it starts at 30%, but every dragon rot essence item lowers it. Unseen aid is tied to the dragon's heritage. Emma explains that repeated deaths spread dragon rot to people Wolf has met, and that sickness does not kill them, but it does block some quest progress until it is cured. To restore the chance, you need Emma's cure quest, a dragon's blood droplet, and a sculptor's idol. Anyways, the world is harsh, so we need the money. Buying a gold pouch is the way to go. Gold pouches convert your lost sen into an item that cannot be lost on death. You can buy pouches from merchants at about 10% value of your wealth. For example, a Litecoin purse holds 100 sen, but costs 110 sen. Once purchased, the sen is locked inside the pouch until you use it, at which point the full amount is returned to your total. Fans started following this trend. Whenever we have spare sen and nothing urgent to spend it on, we convert it into pouches. This reduces loss on death and keeps your resources stable during difficult areas or boss attempts. You can always spend extra sen on spirit emblems, which are cheap early in the game and always useful for prosthetic tools. Immortality has gone wrong, and why wouldn't it? It's immoral and, not to mention, impossible. The strongest proof is the infested monk enemies. Weaker versions look human, while the most dangerous ones visibly have a centipede crawling out of the body, and that parasite is what keeps them fighting after death. The same thing happens in the Guardian Ape fight, where the second phase changes once the centipede takes control of the body. The ape stops acting like a wild beast and starts moving with those long, writhing, almost insect-like attacks. That idea connects to the wider lore around Senpo Temple. The holy chapter Infested says, "To be undying is to walk the eternal path to enlightenment," which is one of Sekiro's most disturbing lines because it treats corruption like a sacred path. I feel like the centipedes are just random parasites. They are tied to Senpo's twisted search for immortality and to the monks who abandoned real Buddhist practices in favor of keeping their bodies alive. Centipede chiefs, like the Long Arms, are even described as leaders among their kind. I remember that old book I read called The Animorphs. It featured an intelligent race of alien worms called Yeerks. I gotta say, the idea isn't very novel, but the execution in the game is perfect. Elden Ring's Millennia is considered one of the hardest boss fights in all the Souls games combined. But did you know that one of the deadliest moves Millennia chains against the Tarnished is actually inspired from Sekiro? For hardcore gamers who suffer from chronic rage quitting, Millennia was the ultimate boss fight challenge. It was all difficult until that one naked guy with a pot for a hat came and destroyed her. Getting back to Sekiro, look at this weapon art. What does that remind you of? The exact same combo from Millennia that haunted me in my sleep for exactly 17 nights. And not just that. There are other similarities between Wolf and Millennia. For instance, she has an arm severed and replaced by prosthetics, just like Wolf. Her rebirth animation also has flower-based effects, like Sekiro does, just a little less flashy. Then they are the Rot siblings. She is rotting with scarlet rot and spreads it everywhere, as Sekiro does with dragon rot. She also protects her brother, Miquella, a divine childlike figure, as Sekiro does with the divine heir. Lore-wise, we couldn't speculate many links between the two characters, but hey, that never stops the theorists now, does it? The Sakura Droplet is a small item with a very specific payoff. You get it after beating Lady Butterfly in the Hirata Estate ceremony. In the item text, it hints at someone who returned from the Divine Realm, which links it to Sekiro's bigger immortality lore. Now, what's so unique about this item? If you give it to Kuro, you gain 1 extra resurrection node. A resurrection node is 1 charge that lets Wolf revive after death instead of loading him back to an idol. That extra charge can save a boss run, especially early in the game when every mistake hurts. There are no branching rewards here. The item always goes to Kuro, and the benefit is always the same: more resurrection power. However, for lore hunters like me, there is a hidden reward tied to this item. Give the Sakura droplet to the Divine Child of Rejuvenation, and you'll be rewarded with unique dialogue lines. She says, "May this Sakura droplet give you strength," to which Wolf replies with, "I humbly accept." What's the exchange? No one could figure it out. It is just very clever multi-layered writing. But our journey doesn't end here. Still awake? Then click here and step into another brutal, beautiful world. Red Dead Redemption 2. I'll see you there.